I think if you transition this into this upcoming season, you know, it's interesting. Like when this coaching search first started, I saw a lot of people talking about different names and seeing, okay, it could be this guy, it could be that guy. But the theme was always the same. Whoever it is has to come in and win right away. Like you have to immediately be able to establish this was the right move. This is not the era of old, right? Where you have a 3-year plan and you try to get everything done once you get to year 3. We know that the patience has sort of worn out a little bit now for Kentucky fans, given the early round
Yeah.
exits in the NCAA tournament and all that. So I'm curious your
Right.
thoughts on, and look, we're having this discussion without knowing what the roster looks like. So it's impossible to tell you exactly, hey, they're going to be a top 5 team. They're going to be a top 25 team. We don't know because we don't know who's on the roster. But I mean, what is, the right expectation for year 1, right? I guess that's the hard question to answer right now. So,
well, I can tell you what the expectation was had there not been a coaching change, and that had been Final Four or bust, and probably some other milestones on top of that. So now we start anew. What will the roster look like? And we're in a different age, right? It's not, normally you're right. This would have been a 3-year rebuild because you have to start recruiting high school kids. I think Mark Pope's philosophy is going to be find kids that potentially could stay 2 to 3 years. And then, maybe you get a couple of top kids a year, from high school, but it's going to be the Villanova playbook. It's going to be UConn's playbook. I mean, look what NC State did this year, Blake. I mean, they were all transfers, and figured it out by the end of the year and made a run. So I think, again, Mark's going to play 5 out. He's going to play some zone defense. Kentucky basketball hadn't seen a zone defense in 15 years. Hadn't played zone defense in 15 years. So I think fans are just looking forward to seeing X's and O's basketball, and described as such as Mark tries to build this program and understand why he's bringing in certain kids. There's going to be talent available. That's the beautiful thing. He can put together, and with an NIL budget reportedly north of $5 million, maybe closer to $6 million now with the basketball program, they're going to be able to get the kids that can play at a high level. But he will not sacrifice this is something I think all Kentucky fans can be excited about. He will maintain that everybody that puts that jersey on, they may not be from Kentucky, but they will feel and understand what it means to wear that jersey. And I think that's a big part of it. And again, selfless play, you'll see that from Mark. And I'm excited about that as well. He'll put together the roster, and you'll see, I think as early as was yesterday or maybe this morning, the kid, the transfer from Duke, Jeremy Roach, he's going to land somewhere. And so I think he's already in discussions with Kentucky. So Mark Pope's talking to every, major prospect in the portal. And I think he's going to put together maybe not the most talented roster, but they'll be exciting to watch. And I'll point this out for our younger listeners and viewers. The 3-point shot came into college basketball in the mid to late 80s. I believe 87 was the first Final Four with the 3-point shot. And Rick Pitino, who coached Providence College way back then, was partially to credit for the 3-point shot catching so much momentum in the college game. Pitino brought that to Kentucky and then played that style until he left. Pressed probably more so. Mark runs that style. Mark Pope runs that style of basketball, modified a little bit, but you'll see him press. You'll see him throw zone defense, and he'll play 5 out, and they're going to shoot a lot of threes like he did at BYU. It'll be exciting, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's what we did bring this up. We said, for everyone that thought Alabama took a lot of threes, keep in mind that BYU shot more threes than Alabama did this past season. BYU was second in the country, 32 threes per game. Alabama, for reference, 29.9. So think about that. I mean, this was, Alabama was kind of the team that's always been the darling from 3-point percentage-wise when Nate Oates has been there. But now you think about bringing in a coach whose team just shot more than that. And we had an interesting question here too, Stuart, when we asked this in the live stream and we got split. It's probably 50-50, I thought, when we finally got the answers in. But I asked people, I said, if you're looking at this, which there's a lot more in college coaching now, and we've talked about it, more than just coaching basketball, there's a lot that goes to it. But I said, if you're asking me, who's the better X's and O's coach, Mark Pope or John Calipari? And there were a lot of people. I mean, I thought it should be kind of a split reaction, but when you look at this, one of the things that I think people got frustrated with Cal was that until maybe this past season where it felt like their offense evolved a little bit more, and it helps when you have kind of the recipe for talent that you had this season offensively. But there were a lot of years, right, where you watch them on offense and you're like, what are they running? I see one guy dribbling. I see four guys standing out here on the perimeter and just kind of staring. And, of course, it's part of the dribble drive and different evolutions of that he had over the years. But I feel like you got to a point where, like you said, you look at the way Mark Pope coaches and knowing that at BYU and Utah Valley, you weren't going to get the kind of talent that you're probably going to be able to get at Kentucky. And so you're having to come up with these different things, fundamental-wise, the X's and O's and all that. I'm very curious to see if you combine those two together. And again, looking at this guy, like you said, from an X's and O's standpoint, there can certainly be more upside for a Mark Pope than there was John Calipari, because it felt like that was always one of the knocks on Cal at Kentucky, was that he's relying on the best talent in the world, but sometimes that talent just went out and made plays, right? They didn't have to be put in a position where they were just running X's and O's and this set on every single. If Mark Pope can combine the two, the sky's the limit, right? So,
yeah. Well, and again, it's hard to compare eras, but you look at coaches, from this era, and you look at Pitino early in his career. He was able to do the latter. A great bench coach. Tubby Smith was a great bench coach. A lot of people don't give him credit for that. His in-game adjustments, I think, were one of his best traits as a coach. You're going to get somebody that is, again, that believes in, hey, it's not just enough to get the best players. And Cal, to your point, would say, hey, I'm going to recruit the best of the best at Kentucky because I can. And then we'll just run stuff. Like that was a common phrase that we're just going to run our stuff. And depending on who was on the floor and beat your man and take him off the dribble. And you're right. A lot of people at times like, okay, what are we running? I mean, he had sets. I mean, he was notorious for just, letting his players ball. He would say, go ball. Yeah. And I think you just have to be better than that in today's game, especially with young players like he had. I mean, it's quite remarkable that he was as successful as he was, especially the first 6 or 7 years of his tenure at Kentucky. He had so much talent, and it worked out. It just so happened that the game changed, and he unfortunately didn't evolve as quickly at Kentucky. It'll be interesting to see, though, Blake, what he does at Arkansas. Does he pivot with older players? I think he will.
Well, that was the thing, and that's, you mentioned earlier, the importance of Mark Pope, and this roster is going to naturally be older just because this is the pool they have to choose from. It's going to be getting a lot of these transfers. But it's like there was so little room for error with this past year's team, and we saw it play out in the NCAA tournament where you had Antonio Reeves, you had Trey Mitchell, and those were the only two old guys on the roster. And if you get in a situation kind of like they did against Oakland, where you have one of these freshmen or two of these freshmen that don't have their best game, you're in trouble. Right. And it's like I'm like, you need to build a roster where you got at least 5 of those guys, where it's not just 2 like they had last year. You need at least 5 of those guys that are either seniors or grad transfers, whatever, or even just upperclassmen at this point. It doesn't even have to be all seniors or grad transfers, just guys who have played a lot of basketball. And I said, and we'll see how it pans out with the roster, but I'm like, if you're Mark Pope, there's plenty of guys in the transfer portal that have at least played in an NCAA tournament game. Not saying they played a ton, not saying their team advanced to the Final Four, but go out and grab a couple guys that you feel like can fit, that have NCAA tournament experience. And obviously they need to be able to play during the season and all that, but there are guys out there, I'm sure, as we look through the pool of 1,700 or whatever the number is now, see what you can find with guys like that, because that is, again, going to be the recipe for success for him. It's going to be not just reinvigorating the regular season, winning more regular season titles, which has gotten away from Kentucky in recent years, with Alabama, with Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, teams like that have all jumped in and won regular season titles. The SEC tournament, I know it's interesting. I don't know what you think about this, Stuart, but we had a lot of fans, and we have the debate on what does the SEC tournament really mean, but there are a lot of Kentucky fans that were like, we just want somebody who comes back that cares about winning the SEC tournament again, because we've owned that for so many years, right? And again, there are so many ways he can be different, and it really just comes down to how you build the roster and all that.
Well, he mentioned, it's funny, the SEC tournament, he mentioned that in his press conference remarks, because Cal was so dismissive of the SEC tournament, and fans, it's a different group of fans in Nashville for that tournament. And I think everyone knows that. But Cal would be dismissive as to, that tournament doesn't matter. We're playing for the one after the SEC tournament, And so I think this year, especially when Kentucky flamed out in its opening game in Nashville and then did the same thing in the tournament, it was just like, okay, what are we doing? This team's built for March. Okay, wait a minute. I joked the other day, if Jack Golke, had another year of eligibility, maybe Mark can pull him in for next year's campaign, Yeah. So anyway, Jack Golke from Oakland. So anyway, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Also, you mentioned Reed Sheppard. Mark Pope and Jeff Sheppard, Reed's father, are very close since their playing days at Kentucky. And I know Mark is legitimately not, over pressuring that situation, being very respectful of that family as they kind of decide what's best for Reed. And, I think it's still on the table that he might come back, but, he's got to make the right decision for him.